Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Masson-Minnock. I am one of the I'm one of the co-facilitators of the Michigan Local Food Council Network. This is part 2 of our fund development webinars, and we're excited to see so many of you here coming back and sharing your lunch hour for the second week in a row. Just a reminder that this call and all of our activities are sponsored by grants from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation and Michigan Health Endowment Fund. Again, my name is Megan. I'm one of the co-facilitators. Liz Gensler is also on the webinar. She is the other co-facilitator of the network. And then we also have Jen Booher, who's going to be our trainer for today. We wanted to start, though, with introduction. So if everyone could, I will call names and then I'll go through numbers. If you could please introduce yourself, which local food council or organization you're associated with. And then also something that you're hoping to learn today. So let's start with Abby Harper.
Hi, I'm Abby Harper. I'm from the Capital Area Food Council, and I work for MSU Extension. I guess one of the things that I was reflecting on the last webinar and today is our council has always struggled with the balance between like seeking funds to support our activities and outreach and not creating additional competition for the organizations in our region that are already doing really good direct food systems related work. I don't know if that's a hoping to learn or just something that I was kind of grappling with during the first call and continue to think about today. So
Great, yeah, great point. Christine Ranger.
Yeah, good morning. Christine Ranger with the Huron Shores Food and Farming Alliance and Food Policy Council. Did you ask a question that I missed?
Just when you did the first two things, but also one thing that you're hoping to learn today. How to get organized to do fundraising, basically, or everything that involves for a brand new organization. Great. Dee Dee Peterson.
Hi, I'm from Jewish Family Service in Oakland County. I'm kind of new to this conversation and just really interested to hear what more I can learn about fundraising for my organization and food advocacy.
Okay, great, great. Are you associated with Oakland County Food Policy Council?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, then also Rachel Presley.
Hello, I'm Rachel Presley. I work for the Western UP Planning and Development Region, and I coordinate the Western UP Food Systems Council. What we're really hoping to learn today is everything because we're so new, so we really appreciate you having this webinar to teach us. And we shared out the first webinar notes with our council and everyone is really excited, so thank you.
Well, great. Larry Dyer.
Hi, I'm Larry Dyer. I'm with the local Food Alliance of Northern Michigan up in Petoskey area. What we call the Northern Farms Food Shed. The county's up in the very northwestern tip of the state. And I guess what I'd like to is maybe gain some insight or some ideas on how to build like a baseline support for the organization. We've done reasonably well at finding grants and other funding for specific projects, but how to just find some baseline support to just keep kind of the administrative tasks and the general networking and outreach kind of things that aren't funded by specific projects. And I just have to share that I'm feeling lucky today because I had a meeting this morning at Maple Bay Farm, one of Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy's projects. And so I'm doing the webinar from looking out a second-story window of this old farmhouse at all this really cool farmland that's protected under conservation easements.
Well, nice. I think we're all jealous of your location. So, Markel Miller.
Hello, good morning. Or good afternoon. I am with the Washington County Food Policy Council, in my day jobs with food gatherers, the food bank serving Washtenaw County. I'm hoping today just to kind of get a few more specifics that are relevant to our council and our structure as a advisory committee of the county entity, and just how that kind of works with where our organizational structure is, and not needing operating funding, but having a better plan to pursue project funding or capacity funding.
All right, Barbara James. Hi, Barbara. Oh, okay. So Barbara, we're going to move to Lisa Ugansky, and then we'll come back to you, and we'll see if we can get the technology to work. Also, you can type in the chat, and I'll read it in case there's some technical difficulties. So Lisa, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Lisa Ugansky. I'm with Ottawa Food, and I think someone else said something similar, but trying to find ways to make an ask for some fund development for our general infrastructure, not necessarily just related to a specific program, but ways to keep things going so that we're not constantly just looking for funds at the time when we want to run a specific program.
Great. Yeah, I think that's the struggle that a lot of people have. So we'll go back to Barbara. I'm gonna count to 5. Okay, we're gonna have time at the end too for people to share during questions. Janelle.
Hi there. I am representing the Kent County Food Policy Council formation team. So this has been an ongoing conversation in Kent County about how we get a food policy council off the ground. And I think one of the big barriers has been capacity from the formation team members. So really looking to find ways to support that capacity so we can get it off the ground sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think all starting councils have some of those some of those challenges. All right, 19062. I don't know if you know that that's you. Oh, you're clicked up. Yes.
Yes, that's me. My name is Kaylee, not a number, but I work in Food Corps, and it is an AmeriCorps program that basically teaches nutrition in schools. And I'm currently in Ferndale, Michigan, greater Detroit area. And my school is out for the summer, and I just need some stuff to do, kind of some professional development type things. So yeah, here I am.
Well, we're happy to fill your summer. At least for a couple hours. All right. And then also, I know this is not someone's name, but it's popping up on the, this is all I have to go on. It says computer-2. And that might be a Zoom glitch. All right. Anybody who didn't get a chance to introduce themselves who's on the webinar and would like to? Like I said, we'll have time for questions at the end, and definitely part of the network is to give people an opportunity to connect and build relationships. So those introductions are really important. I wanted to briefly though, before we dive into the webinar, turn the floor over to Lori Yelton from Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. Last webinar, I had asked about grants and how do you build relationships with grants and what's the best way to do that. And Jen shared that that wasn't her place of expertise. So we invited Lori to just share today for a couple of minutes about what those grants are and kind of what's the best way to do your homework and approach folks in her department about them. So Lori, could you share your insights with us?
Can you hear me, Megan?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great, great. Good afternoon, everybody. Hi. Just through the department, I want you to know that, you know, between federal grants and state grants, the department provides three big ones that I work more closely with and probably know the most about. And that's our specialty crop grant block grant, our value added grant, our rural development funds grant, and also the food safety education grant. So those come out throughout the year. We actually just closed on the value added, and I think those announcements, what it does is they have a committee that comes together and makes recommendations on which ones to fund, and then that goes to the director of the department, and he looks through, or she, and they decide on if that is what's needed, and usually they do go with the recommendations, and so those should be announced probably in the next month or two. I think between these, just so you understand, the specialty crop really comes into being involved on enhancing the competitiveness of grants. So what can you do to increase the use of beans or apples or floriculture, things like that. So we get a lot of grants on that one. When it comes to value added, you're looking a little bit more at the development of agricultural, either processing, developing some kind of regional food systems or healthy food access. I think we had 94 grants that came in just recently. So very competitive, very difficult to make decisions on. A lot of very, very good grants when we were just looking those over. The food safety education grant, that is one that comes through fees that some of our establishments pay, and then it goes out to provide consumer education on food safety or some kind of establishment. So it could be a restaurant, it could be schools, things like that, for providing those kind of education. The Rural Development Fund is a really sustaining land-based industries, and it supports and benefits more rural communities. So that was one that I think you want to look a little more into. I don't have the date on that one in mind. That was one I was wondering about. But if you go to michigan.gov, you can get into MDARD, which is MDARD, which is Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and get under grants. It'll say there's a tab just on grants. You can actually sign up on an email and have, so when these grants come up or the openings come up, you can receive notification of that. So that's one of the big things I would recommend, so you have the timing of those. The other thing, when you're looking at these grants and you're filling them out and stuff, really takes some time. I can tell you that it's amazing the group that comes together, because you get everything from bankers to people in different backgrounds looking at these regarding healthy food access, or looking at business propositions, looking at planning. I mean, so many different people are on these committees. So I always tell people, you know, really go through, take your time, start early, look at and get recommendation letters, involve your community in it. You know, if you're coming out and you're asking for a tractor for your one small, 10-acre farm, it's probably not going to go. If you're doing something where you're getting equipment that's going to be shared with others, or other ones are going to be able to benefit, maybe having an incubation kitchen, having a processing plant where others are going to be able to have access as well. Those things add points. People notice those things, that this is a grant that's being put out for not just the benefit of this business to grow, but the benefit of the community in a lot of ways. So I always tell people, reach out, get your support wherever you can, have a financial plan. I mean, people sometimes come back with these plans and they have these ideas, but there's nothing to document the need of it, or the proof of it, or that they have the backing of it, So if you've got a bank, or if you've got the Michigan Good Food Fund, somebody else to back you, have those letters, have those things to go along with it. And then contact people. You're always welcome to call a department, and we can make connections. Because if you're seeking a certain area or wondering about something, I think that they would help you. I'm not sure that they can give out sample grants or anything like that, but maybe the ones that have been provided can be published, and you can look at those. So I'd have to ask a little bit more on that. But I just want people, we get so many good ones, and it's just amazing. what we have to pass up. The other thing is look at when you're putting your costs together. I noticed the financial people really look at this as don't just generalize, I need 10,000 for this and 8,000 for this, you know, look and say, hey, I need this for processing. And we looked at equipment and a quote was given at $8,650, you know, something like that. People notice the little things, the work that was put into it, you know, the details that were put into it. So I think that's it that I can think of the top of my head. I'm sorry, I'm driving and trying to do this. So does anyone have any questions?
Well, thanks, Lori. And if anybody has questions later, I think most people have Lori's information, but we will definitely pass on her contact information and also make connections. Just real quickly, Liz, you wanted to share something from Senator Stabenow's office as well before we get underway?
Yeah, it just, I was at a meeting last week and was reminded that Senator Stabenow's office is happy to provide a letter of support for federal grant applications when people are putting them in from Michigan. And her staff person, Terry Campbell, who was at that meeting, had some letter request forms. So I will scan this and send it out to the group. But you know, they're very interested in supporting what's going on in Michigan, particularly as it comes to food and ag. So they are more than willing to lend their voice to your federal grant applications when you're doing those.
Great, thanks. Well, and with that, I want to turn it over to Jen to talk to us about the fund and fund development. And all the things that local food councils can do to be more successful in raising those funds and building those relationships. So Jen, thanks so much for being here today.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you again, everyone, too, for taking your lunchtime, as Megan said, a second week in a row. For those of you that did not sit in on the first webinar, you do have access to that. This webinar today is kind of a build on a lot of the information that we covered in that initial webinar. One point that I wanted to remind everyone of too is, you know, I'm very aware of the different level that each of our councils are currently from the standpoint of fund development. You know, we have, as you've already covered, some councils are at a point where you're ready to consider applying for capacity building grants, and then we have councils that are just now starting to get their feet on the ground and start as startup organizations. So with that said, I really want today to be not just a webinar, but also a work session. So because we have such a diverse group, if you have specific questions, you can either throw those into the chat or ask them as we go along. I want to definitely make this an interactive conversation. So please do feel free to participate. I just ask that if you do have a question, if you can show yourself in the video side, that would be helpful for me as well moving forward. So the fun and fund development. So I put that title on there specifically for most of my fund development webinars and presentations because yes, I actually do feel fund development is fun. And you may think I'm crazy, but the main reason for that is probably because this isn't necessarily your expertise. And I'm hoping that today will at least get you a little bit more comfortable with that concept. And to start off, what you really need to understand is successful fund development is when you realize you're not asking for money, you're truly giving foundations and individuals an opportunity to support something great. And 9 times out of 10, most people want to be a part of that. So let's all kind of get in that mindset as we move forward and really look at some of the keys to fund development success. First, and again, those who participated last week, there's a little bit of repeat here, but there's a reason for that. These are some fundamentals that I want to make sure that we drive home leading into this webinar as well. And the first thing I want to take a look at is fundraising versus fund development, and what does that mean? So most of us are used to fundraising as, okay, we need money, we need to raise it fast, and once we raise that money, we need even more money. So that's usually looking at our immediate need versus thinking of fund development as more of a process and considering that big picture. That big picture being, you know, within our councils, we want to create a culture of philanthropy among our staff, if we have staff, board, if we have board members, as well as our volunteer network and donors. We want to focus on not just raising money in record-breaking time, you know, through our standard grant process or maybe passing the hat at special events, but we want to look at raising funds as building relationships, because that takes our mind away from meeting that immediate need to working towards long-term sustainability for the work of the council. And we want to empower others to serve as ambassadors. So, for example, you may have one person right now that's kind of wearing all the hats and is really in charge of everything. Well, I challenge that you as that person potentially to spread the love, you know, delegate, share responsibilities with individuals. And in order for them to be effective in doing that and helping you support fund development efforts, you need to make sure that they feel comfortable as ambassadors. So be sure that you're informing them and educating them so that they can too go out into the community and help you build those relationships. You are not in this alone unless you want to be, and I don't recommend that. Advance towards long-term sustainability. Again, that should always be the focus. And that is a big difference between just thinking about fundraising, again, raising money in record-breaking time, and thinking more about fund development as a process and moving your council to long-term sustainability down the road, moving those programs and services that you support in your community, helping to work and those as well as far as achieving long-term sustainability. So we're not just thinking about the challenge or the need that's straight in front of us, but what about 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, and how will we be sure that we can support those needs? So again, this is one of my favorite visuals as far as really understanding what is fund development. Effective fund development strategy, it's really a shift in your thinking from short-term gain to long-term sustainability. And with that being said, whenever we have a word like long-term, we know that this is going to take time, right? This is a process. It's not something like a light switch that you turn on and then all of a sudden all the funding is flowing in through the door. And that process is what we're going to really spend some time talking about today. Any questions so far as fundraising versus fund development? So let's talk about a fund development program. And a lot of times, especially with smaller organizations, we don't think about fund development as an established program, but it really should be. Meaning this is something that we're thinking about on a year-round basis. When we're planning for example, our annual budget for our upcoming year, fund development should be included in that. So what's it take to develop a successful fund development program? A strong mission statement for your council, a clear story telling, you know, who we are, what we do, who we serve, and why should I care as a donor or a volunteer. It takes gaining the trust of your donor base, be it foundations or individuals, as well as being able to clearly articulate your impact in the community and how their contributions to your organization are going to make a difference in your community. So showing them that impact. It takes prioritized funding needs and setting goals. So basically what that means is we have to give thought to this. You know, we need to be very structured about, you know, what needs are we looking to meet this year and beyond this year, and then setting some very specific goals on how we're going to meet those needs. It takes donor-centered fund development efforts. And when people hear donor-centered, sometimes they think I'm only referring to individual donors, but I'm not. If you're talking about private or public foundations as well, you need to think about what does donor-centered mean to those potential funders. And essentially, it just means putting the donor first. So we're thinking not just about what are our needs as a council, as a food council, but what are the donors' needs? And how can we approach them through conversation and through grant proposals in a way that shows that we care about helping them meet those needs? It takes strong leadership. And when I say that, it can't just be one person. A successful fund development program is just It's next to impossible if it's on the shoulders of one individual because there's so many different components to it. And strong leadership is critical because we're talking about big things like having conversations with major donors, having a skill set that allows you to write grant proposals and things of that nature. Have I seen solely volunteer organizations with successful fund development programs? Absolutely. The key is that they just have a plan in place. And this plan does not have to be like a 30-page document that you just get exhausted by page 15 and you never implement anything because it just looks overwhelming. It can be a one-page of this is what I'm going to do this week, this month, this year. So when I say it takes leadership, it takes a team. You might start with one, but the idea is making sure that we have a plan in place that allows us to really attract those other ambassadors who too can help us be successful in our fund development efforts. So I want to start first with the compelling story. And I know I talked about this a little bit during our first webinar, and this is your case statement. So this is what you're sending out to the world that clearly states what we do, who we serve, what need that we're meeting as a food council, and why should I care as a donor, as a volunteer, as a staff member. I know that Megan did have an opportunity to send out to you these questions just to kind of prepare you with some thoughts for the webinar. And I did want to give those of you who took that time an opportunity to share what your thoughts were in relation to some of these questions to kind of show us how you've started to take that first step in creating your story. So do we have anybody out there who's had an opportunity to give these questions some thought? Do we have anybody out there who wants to answer these questions now? Because that's fun too. Anybody? Well, don't feel bad. It's okay. It's Monday. Yes, Megan?
Well, I mean, I think Liz and I could answer that for the network.
I think that would be great because I think that's where it starts. Yeah.
And so, like, what do? We create a space for local food councils to learn from each other and also to have enough resources to build capacity to change the food system here in Michigan. And for I think, and Liz can chime in, like, we've never talked about this, but this is just, what we've done through the years. Who do we serve? Is that we serve local food councils and also all the folks who are associated with them. And what need are we meeting? I think we're meeting a need that a need for relationship and a need for resources in order to change the food system. And why should I care? Is that we're all part of this. We're all part of the food system, whether you like it or not, or whether you realize it or not. Because we all eat and it all affects us in some way or shape and fashion in our lives at multiple levels. So, I think those are short answers that we would say if somebody asked us. But I'm not sure if Rich Parag, who's the head of Center for Regional Food Systems, I'm sure when he's talking about the center and the Michigan Good Food Charter, there are some other pieces to that story because we're one component of many, many networks that are working in that. And I think what we try and do is to be compelling to get people to come to just step in the door. And then what our challenge is that the quality of once you're here is so great that you just don't want to leave. But I know that for local food councils, it's really a struggle to even just find that identity. And then sometimes you have a lot of people who are helping you to start, and they're what I call yeah buts, and money's a big part of that. Yeah, but we don't have enough money, so we're not going to go and take that step. Or yeah, but this and this, and we're not going to make a plan.
Right.
And so, what's to do this work, which is kind of heavy work, where you don't see the reward right away, often is hard times to take a whole group through.
Well, that makes sense.
And I don't know whether other local food councils have felt the same thing when they've been going through this, especially the ones that are starting.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us, Megan, because I think from a local food council standpoint, you know, starting with adding maybe another question here, what's the big picture, and being able to understand your story that you've shared and how the local food councils fit into that. And then from that point, really getting into detail of their individual stories within their communities. So I guess first, we'd want to start with getting that story really, you know, honed in and clear and really clear and concise so that they can use that as a tool in building their individual case statements. And for the local councils, I just have to say that if this is, you know, if we don't have a case statement in place, if we aren't very clear on our story, it's time to start. It's time to start writing. And it doesn't have to be a complex process. And I do understand, you know, I've been in your shoes, part of a volunteer organization when there's so many different moving elements. But when it comes to fund development, this is where it all starts. You know, if we can't understand our story and effectively communicate that in a way to the broader public, you know, specific funders, be it the state, private and public foundations, or individuals, then it's really hard to get their buy-in, you know, to get them to want to invest in what we do. And this is very similar with many nonprofit and even for-profit organizations. You know, we're doing the work, we know it's good. I mean, great things are happening. But when you're new to the organization or to the council in this case, you know, you're like, it's very hard to invest in that. It's really easy to say, great job, I'm glad you keep doing it. But to really write the check and invest my time and money in that, I need to understand who you are, what you do, and why in the world should I care? Why should I be part of this? So I challenge you from this webinar moving forward, before you start anywhere, start with those elements. What is our mission statement? If we don't have one in place, let's get it in place. You know, and then beyond that, what's our story? You know, let's get it down on paper. Let's share it with people. Let's share it with some of our stakeholders, if they're volunteers or donors, and get their feedback and really develop that clear messaging that is really your launch pad into successful fund development. So any questions at all regarding building your story? Okay, I'm going to take that as we're all excited to get ready and started, and I can't wait to hear your stories. So the other element that I mentioned early on, you know, okay, we have our story in place, we have donors in place. What motivates foundations? What motivates individuals to give? Well, one key element is trust, and gaining their trust is very important to successful fund development. Of course, the initial piece to that, again, is having that strong mission statement, the purpose of why you exist, and that story in place is really critical. In addition to that, you need to show donors, you know, what's in it for me. And I'm not saying that I want a plaque on the wall or, you know, so they're a tangible exchange, but what they really want to see is, you know, what am I going to get out of this as a donor? You know, most individuals, for example, they want to see good things happen. So show them how their contribution will make good things happen. Be consistent with your message. And again, I keep going back to that case statement, and it doesn't have to be an 18, 20, 30-page document. It can be a one-pager with some bullet points. Be consistent with that message. Get it down on paper. Share it with your ambassadors, with your volunteers. So when they're out in the community, they're telling people the same thing that you are versus just hanging on to that one thing that they're most comfortable talking about. So be consistent with your message. Consistency is certainly something. It doesn't only build your reputation, but it gets people to understand who you are. Build personal relationships, and again, a strong reputation. We're going to talk about this in more detail later on, but personal relationships at the partner level, at the potential donor level, at the volunteer level, the community level are so important. And again, that contributes to your strong reputation. Express your gratitude and be sincere in your efforts to keep donors connected. And I have to put this in here because so many nonprofits, and in my positions as fund development director of organizations early on, you know, I was so excited to get the check in the door that I kind of was like, hey, thank you. I sent that initial acknowledgement out, but I neglected to keep thanking them throughout the year, keep them engaged throughout the year. And I'll tell you now, It's a lot easier to renew a donor when they're still active and still engaged and connected than it is to try to encourage a lapsed donor to come back on board because they didn't continue their giving because they didn't feel as though they were appreciated or connected to the organization any longer. Be accountable and deliver on your promises. Being accountable and delivering on promises just means making sure that we do what we say we're going to do. You know, when you're in conversations with donors, when you're writing grant proposals and you're focusing on what the outcomes of this grant will be, make sure that you make it happen. Don't make broken promises. If it sounds good, but it's not something that truly is attainable, then we don't want to put that as a goal for our year moving forward. So be accountable and deliver on your promises. Be honest about challenges and share your accomplishments. Everybody knows that it's not easy, right? If it's a nonprofit or if it's a food council in a local community, it isn't all, you know, a bed of roses. We're always going to face challenges. Some of those challenges become public. Some of those challenges might just include, you know, we're barely hanging on, not positioning yourselves as a sinking ship, but more so if we had your contribution, we would be able to do so much more. If we had your contribution to contribute to capacity and add potentially an executive director or just a program officer, look at where it would take us. So we might be sharing those challenges, but again, not in a way that positions us in the donor's mind or the foundation's mind as a sinking ship that's desperate, but more so we're holding our own, but we want to do more. The demand is there, and we need your support to do that. And of course, don't forget to share your accomplishments. One of the best ways to keep donors connected is throughout the year, share some great aha things that have happened for you, celebrate those accomplishments and share them so that they feel a part of those accomplishments. That can be done through an email, that can be done through social media, that can be done through a newsletter, just a one-pager that maybe you put together for major donors, and things of that nature. Keep your doors wide open. They always say, if you ask for money, you'll get advice. If you ask for advice, you'll get support and money. And I think, you know, I can actually say that that is absolutely true. So when I say keep your doors open, it's not just keep them open and come see us anytime, but also keep them open to advice from your donors. Engage them as a resource. And it's really amazing to see what great partnerships can happen between an organization and a donor when those doors are wide open and our minds are wide open to receiving that advice. Any questions on trust? Any examples anybody would like to give as far as how this has worked for them in their efforts? Maybe some of those councils that are a little bit more seasoned in fund development? All right. So we've gained trust, and the other element that really encourages donors to give, be it foundations or individuals, is being able to show our impact. As I said earlier, fundraising is all about building relationships and showing people the value of the council in your communities. In order to do that effectively, we kind of need to start with the end in mind. So we need to ask ourselves first, and these two things that I'm about to talk about right now help support that case statement. Answer to the question, what does success look like for your council? So when you give yourself time to sit around in that small group and ask these questions, the answers that you come up with are your assets. And when I say your assets, I mean your assets in fundraising. When you're able to share who you are, what you do, why you should care, what success looks like for our council, and even further, what the vision is for the council, donors get excited, donors get engaged. These are other key communication elements that if you want to stop struggling in fund development, you need to start here. So again, start with the end in mind. Think for a moment, what does success look like for our council for this year, for 3 years down the road? I wouldn't go past 5 at this point. And then ask yourself the question, as a result of achieving this success, once we are 100% successful as a council, what big change will result from our work? So for example, If success for us looks like in the next 3 years to have a staff of leadership, meaning potentially a program director, an executive director, and one outreach coordinator, as well as a strong donor base. If that's what success looks like for us internally, what is a result? What big change will result from that? Potentially it will be more programs in our community that impact the target market group that's of interest to the donor that you've identified, if it's families, if it's school-age children, so on and so forth. So I think you can see when those two statements are formed, how effective those can be when they're used as tools to engage your donor population, and how much easier when you have your story together, your vision of what success looks like for you internally as a council, and then what change will result from achieving that success. It's much easier to put together those grant requests as well. Any questions at all as far as creating these statements? Does anybody have a vision statement in place that they'd like to share with us today?
This is Lisa from Ottawa Food. We have a vision. It is an available supply of well-balanced meals for all.
That's fantastic. And the reason why I like I would like anyone's vision, I'm sure, but I don't have a lot to critique with that vision because it's broad enough to start a conversation. It's big enough that you don't have to put a time limit on it necessarily, but it's specific enough for you to set a goal for this year, an impact goal against. So moving on to the next section, showing impact. Here again, you want to clearly define your council's impact goal. So what is that one thing that we want to accomplish this year? Again, I'm saying one thing because I know that we all have a lot going on, and but it's ideal if you can have 3 to 4 goals in place. But if you can't, if that seems like too much, just asking yourself even, what is one impact goal that we could accomplish this year that's going to bring us closer to reaching our vision? And Lisa, I'm not sure if you have an impact goal in place or multiple goals, but if you're willing to share those, that would be great.
Yeah, hang on. We have, the way our plan is set up, we have goals. We don't have one impact goal, but we just have a lot of different goals related to our priority areas. So I don't know if that's whether or not that's kind of what you're looking for. But we have about probably 7 or 8 goals within each priority area. For example, one in hunger is supporting the development of policies that focus on eliminating hunger in Ottawa County. Another is reducing stigma around food insecurity and around asking for help. Another is creating greater awareness of local food resources for those in need. And it goes on from there.
Okay. And we're just going to use Ottawa Food Council as our case study for today because this is fantastic. And again, I know I mentioned this in our initial webinar, but being able to think about you're part of a network, being able to reach out to our peers for those food councils who are potentially less developed, focusing the time on developing exactly what Lisa has shared today is critical in developing a successful fund development program. Again, these pieces, the mission, the vision, impact goals are your assets, your fundraising assets that motivate donors to give. They not only motivate donors, but they help you identify appropriate donors to approach. If they're foundations, if they're individuals, it helps you align their interests with your goals and your needs. So Lisa, thank you again very much for sharing that information with us.
And Lisa, was that part of your strategic development plan that you did like a year and a half ago or 2 years?
Yeah, we did. We were doing it last year at this time. Yep, we used the Michigan Local Food Council Network funding to bring in a facilitator to help us through that process.
Megan, can you touch a little bit upon that opportunity that is available as far as
Yeah. Well, actually, Liz is probably the best person to talk about it. If she's ready, we have an RFP out right now for those those development grants. And we were going to do it a little bit differently this year in terms of having it as a participatory grant making process. I don't know, Liz, do you want to give a little more information about it?
Yeah, so the past few years we've had this seed grant program for local councils. And as Megan said, this year we're going to use a participatory approach. So really kind of putting the decision in the hands of you guys, the councils. We have a pot of $20,000 for this year to distribute, among councils, however it's decided makes most sense. So the seed grants are really intended to help councils build capacity and support their involvement in the network to be able to learn from one another. So that's kind of the overarching goal. You can, read all the details in the RFP. And the process that we're going to be using this year, we're asking people to do a short grant application or a funding request, and kind of do an outline of your idea and, the budget, that sort of thing. And then we'll have the review team meet with the applicants to ask questions and give feedback on the grant request. And then people will have an opportunity to revise their applications based on that feedback. So trying to kind of put the decisions into the hands of network members themselves. So it's not just, Megan and I and whoever else, we can recruit to help read through applications, but also offer some more opportunity for councils to get input from one another on their projects and their requests before things are finalized. Because you guys, while every council is quite different, there are some similar challenges and similar things that come up. And we figured kind of giving an opportunity to hear from others before you move forward with the funding probably makes sense to end up with the best outcomes.
That's great. And can you share just your definition of capacity with the group when it comes to those seed money grants?
Yeah, so I guess I don't have a succinct definition in mind, but
well, it doesn't have to be, you can pick it up on the fly.
Things that build the council's ability to do their work. And we're generally looking at sort of the overall work. So like people have noted, there are places to get money for programs, like if you wanted to support a farmer's market, for instance. So this grant is really designed to do some of those baseline support things that Larry was talking about, where we could help support, a part-time coordinator or provide funds for facilitation or strategic plan development. So things that are going to help the council build its infrastructure, build its membership, help its community understand what it's doing, and be able to do its work better.
And a fund development plan too, right, Liz?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, fund development is another example of a way that people could use it.
Oh, that's great. And for the councils that are on the line, that is a great opportunity for all of you to consider. And as Liz has mentioned, when you think capacity building, the simple way to put it is it really supports the people and the tools that are required to make our work possible. And that can be broad, from the standpoint of, infrastructure development, if it's a staffing model, if it's fund development, or as Lisa mentioned, they invested in strategic planning. And to Megan's point, that's exactly where the mission and visioning and setting up these impact goals is derived from that strategic planning process. So again, that's a whole separate webinar, but I guess the point that I want to make, if we haven't had an opportunity to establish those things, and an outside facilitator or council would be helpful for us to do that. If fundraising and fund development is needed now, I certainly don't recommend that you wait. We certainly want to we have at least a guide, if you will, just through this webinar and the previous to at least get us started. But certainly if there are grant opportunities, there are grant opportunities out there that would support the planning process. It's certainly something as a next step if we have not done that, we should consider as local food councils. So what we're talking about today, because I'm going to be referencing plan a lot, and I'm obviously, with the nature of this webinar, it's all about fund development. So I'll be referring to your fund development plan. And that is a piece of your strategic plan, or again, something that is derived out of your strategic planning process. But again, we don't have to wait till the next grant cycle. What I hope you will take away from today's webinar are some steps that you can take in starting to formulate that fund development plan for your council today. Some things that we can do now. So we have our story, right? We have our mission, we have our story, we have in place now elements that we can consider when we think about establishing trust with our donors. We have our impact goals, ideally in place as well. So what's the next step? Once all of those key elements are in place, we're ready to start thinking about our prospects. Who are some of those individuals, foundations, organizations out there that may support our cause, our mission? Of course, we have foundations, private and public, corporations and businesses, service organizations such as your Kiwanis, your Lions Club, things of that nature. Individuals, and when I say individuals, I kind of put them into two different categories. We have our annual donors that we might consider, any donation that's given through an annual appeal process or special event. And then we have our major donors. Those are the donors that kind of are a little step beyond just giving annually, but they give those large contributions. And we, as a council, have to define what that level would be, but they give those sustaining gifts to the council. Oops. And then, of course, early on, as Lori had mentioned, you have the state, and that's something that you don't want to look beyond. I kind of consider those maybe second to foundation grants as far as opportunities for you to grow as a council, and certainly opportunities that provide funding for programs local to your area. So we have the prospects in place, right? We feel like we have everything, we're ready to go, but what about the plan? Do we really know what direction we're taking? Because if you don't have a plan in place to get where you're going, the fact is that you'll never get anywhere. And I really feel that that's something that a lot of organizations miss. We put the mission, the vision, the goals together, but we really never sit down and say to ourselves, okay, this is great. We know what we want to do, but how are we going to get there? So planning can be completely overwhelming, and I certainly don't want it to be overwhelming today, because again, the idea of this webinar is for you to get motivated and at least start making some headway in the area of fund development. So as you have mentioned, Liz, you said that all of our councils are different, and I understand that. So even though a lot of the things I'll be talking about when it comes to planning seem broad and somewhat overwhelming, you have to apply it to where you are as a council. So you want to keep it real. Don't take on more than you can handle. So the reason why a plan is so important, because it gives us that blueprint for success. Like if we don't write down a to-do list, for example, it's really hard to stay focused and remember exactly what we wanted to accomplish that day, right? Your plan is very much like that as far as your fund development efforts. And it moves us from being reactive, again, working to meet immediate needs, to being more proactive, because it's forcing us to think about what do we want to accomplish, not just today, this week, this month, but what are our overall goals as far as accomplishing for this year, for the next 3 years. It provides a roadmap for fundraising, so that we're not just doing the knee-jerk reaction of, hey, I met somebody the other day and they were tied to a foundation and we should just write a grant for them. That's pretty typical for many organizations when we're reactive. Or, oh my gosh, someone's doing a great program, they just came to us, but they need the money tomorrow, but we don't have anybody or any resource that we can reach out to. Through a planning process and being intentional about our efforts, you start to put that roadmap together, so when things come to you that do have an immediate need, you can respond to them in a proactive way, positive way. It gets everybody on the same page. I guess this is really what I like to reference most. For example, it gets us to move from, the bake sale fundraising mindset, which they're great and all, to more of being a council that focuses more on establishing relationships so that we can get sustainable income for the council versus just doing one-off events or one-off mailings, to help us meet a short-term need. And it gets everybody on the same page as far as being more thoughtful in our process and our fund development efforts as well. Oops. So I'm trying to today, my goal was to make it simple, and it's, again, I kind of work at all levels, but I tried to bring it to a place where we could actually give you some strategies that you can start working on now. That's the goal for today. So we want to set our goals, we want to create that plan of action, we want to work the plan, we want to monitor the plan so that we don't keep doing things that aren't working, and that we make sure that we leverage those things that are working. And then we want to make sure we take time to celebrate. Again, share your accomplishments, make sure that each year or even each quarter that you put, a list of the great things that you did accomplish this year. They might be small things, but every accomplishment should be noted and should be celebrated. So what does this look like? First, you will need to start with just asking yourself the question of how much money do we need? When I say that, we're looking at what will it take for us to close in on reaching that impact goal or those impact goals? So the point that you need to take away from here is each goal needs to have funding tied to it. Your overall fund development plan needs to have a budget. You need to have something that you're approaching your individual donors as well as foundations. Liz had mentioned too that a budget needs to be tied to even that grant request. So how much money do we need this year is where we're going to want to start asking ourselves that question. If you aren't a startup and you have years to compare, you want to look at your past. Like, how did we do last year when it comes to fund development? How much money did we bring in? What was our goal? What about years previous? What worked well? What didn't work at all? You want to put those fund development projections into a chart. So you're looking at, what strategies did we try or have we done in the past? What was the accomplishment last year? How did we do 2 years ago? And then based on those findings, what are our projections for this year? And again, this goes back to getting away from, a lot of organizations, when asked what's your fund development goal, they just give me whatever number they are in the red for that year. And they say, that's just what we have to go because we don't have any money to cover that. We want to get away from that and, again, be more thoughtful about our fund development projections. Then you want to detail out your strategies. So you want to actually, if you don't have history to make those estimates, it doesn't mean you can't make them. You just base them on your need. You don't want to make them too aggressive because you certainly don't want to fall short, which is completely unmotivating. But you want to make sure that they're realistic, but also get the organization of the council where it needs to be. So strategies might include grants, it might include direct mail, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with as an annual appeal in the spring or in the fall, major gifts, with those individuals that are giving at a higher level, online giving, and then potentially special events. Then I don't have anyone identified here, but I'm sure if I were to do that for you, it may just be you listed here as the lead, but you certainly want to identify who's responsible for making these things happen and then assign timing to that. Because again, if we just have details and strategies out there without timing assigned and leads, then they're just not going to get off the ground. Then you want to take actions. And this is just one example of strategy we're looking at, for example, grants. What action steps can we take in the area of our grant program to move the needle for our council? Action steps might include researching opportunities. And again, put a lead, a deadline, and resources it'll take for you to do that. Action steps might include prioritizing those opportunities, creating a calendar so that we make sure we don't miss grant deadlines, rating the proposals, following up with the foundations once proposals are submitted, thanking the foundations after the grant is awarded or declined, Yes, even if they say no, we should thank them for their time. And the reason for that is because, I mean, just it's never you, it's never personal. They get a lot of requests. Part of thanking a foundation for their time is part of the cultivation and stewardship process. So it might not be you this year, but if we take that extra step and really go out of our way to show appreciation just for consideration, that helps strengthen that relationship. And then don't forget to cultivate and steward. Again, they may have said no this year, it doesn't mean they'll say no next year, but it certainly won't. It will help you move to the top of the pile if you continue that relationship moving forward, just as you would with an individual donor. And again, here in this case, I'm referring more to those grants to private and public foundations. Does anybody have any questions at all from the standpoint of grant rating process, since we're on this one as an example? I'll take this opportunity to mention, you know, I know that there were a few of you, I tried to document all the questions that you asked earlier, that were really focused on the need for infrastructure development, capacity building, you know, staffing and things of that nature. It's really great that we are seeing foundations, many foundations, move toward, you know, the understanding that we need to support the people that make our work possible. If I were to start anywhere, I would start with your local community foundations in this area in particular when it comes to those infrastructure grants and capacity building. I saw someone chime in. Do we have a question?
I had a question.
Hey, Meg.
Oh.
Yes.
Go
Lori?
ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to mention that was really good. And one thing, if people don't get funded, don't give up on that grant or grant idea, but ask for feedback, because a lot of times, like, they're just competitive, and there's only so much money that either comes through the legislators or through the federal that is allowed each year, and that does change year by year. So I always tell people, you know, sometimes it just may lead more to a little tweaking, a little this, but to ask for feedback, because it doesn't mean that it's any kind of failure, any kind of work. Sometimes, you know, like getting that essay back from your professor and telling them you thought it was great and you got an A, and they tell you it's about a C work, you know, and you're just like dumbfounded and what the heck, all the work you put into it. But I just tell people, you know, don't get discouraged. Just keep pushing, keep pushing. Just like you tell your kids, keep pushing. It doesn't mean it's the end. Just look for where I can improve on it. That's
an excellent point. And thank you for sharing. I just want to piggyback on that. Even before you submit your proposals, you know, asking for feedback, but at the beginning, even asking for advice. So many organizations blindly will submit a letter of it. They'll make the contact, get the go-ahead, submit the letter of intent without even saying, can I just run this idea by you first before I really put the pen to paper? And, you know, program officers, if it's with a large foundation or with your local community foundation, that's why they're there. You know, they're there to guide you through that process. So don't be afraid to ask those kinds of questions. It'll just give you a leg up in the long run.
I had a question on grants and this was somewhat out of what people were saying in the very beginning. Is it worthwhile to identify your competitors or to identify your collaborators as you're going in to writing grants? And at what point in time, how do you avoid a beggar thy neighbor scenario where we're all sniping for the same money?
Right. Well, certainly in the first step in a grant writing proposal, even when you're writing a letter of intent, would be developing that needs statement. And when you do that, you want to ask yourself the question, is this our job? What I'm writing, this need that we're trying to meet, is it my job to do this? Or is there another organization that's well established in the community that should be doing this independently or potentially in collaboration with us? So that's your first opportunity to identify those potential conflicts and or collaborative opportunities. And in that case, you know, if it's something that you both should work on together, it is actually looked upon favorably by foundations and even individual donors as far as that goes, when they see two entities that are collaborating on a project and showing the greater impact. So even though the ask might be more because you're trying to meet the financial needs of both, it's actually looked upon very favorably to submit those grant requests in partnership. But that need statement is kind of for your first checkpoint, because we should never, if we're ever thinking we're competing, then something's not right. You know what I mean? That we haven't asked ourselves enough questions, because even partnering organizations in the community, if they're doing something that aligns with our work, that it shouldn't be competitive. It should be in partnership, right? That's a good question. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Any other questions? We're going to be talking about foundations here a little more in detail. But any for now? Okay. So this is an example of what your action plan might look like within a fund development plan, specifically focused on a strategy related to grants. Okay, so we can keep it pretty simple, right? The next strategy might be major donors. And then you'd have action steps in relation to how you're going to move the needle this year with major donors and so on. So each strategy, you want to have an action steps associated with that. And then once we have that plan in place, it's our job to make it happen, right? To make sure that we move things forward, to make sure that we implement. Very similar to a strategic plan. You know, you want to have that action plan in place, and not just the actions listed, but who's responsible for completing those actions and what time are we going to do that, and then what are the measures of success for each of our strategies. And then move it forward. You want to work the plan. Again, I'm going to drive these points home. You want to monitor the plan. Again, by establishing those measures of success, it allows us to look back and say what's worked, what hasn't worked, what do we need to change. We want to celebrate when things are going well. You know, if it's that first grant that we receive, if we're a startup organization, if it's that donor renewal that we get, or maybe a donor that's increased their giving that year. If it's a new relationship that we've made. Remember, all of our accomplishments don't have to just be tied to money. You know, the idea is that they're tied to things that'll move us toward stronger fund development efforts, and making a relationship, having that connection, having an individual that might be a potential donor actually attend or participate in one of our programs. That is a win in fund development. And then you need to get started. So once we have that plan in place, we've developed that plan with that small group of individuals who are ready and raring to go, we need to get moving forward. So in order to do that, we need to think about what we know. So we really need to tell ourselves, okay, these are the facts. People, they want to see change and they want to see progress. We know that. We know that people want to be part of making change and progress. We know that in order to see progress, be it in our community, our region, our state, our country, our world, it's really important to begin with making a change at the local level. And I'm saying that not just for local food councils, you know, uniquely. I work with a lot of donors at various giving levels, and it's really important to many of these donors, if they're giving in their community, they're doing that because they see the bigger picture. So this is a really good example of when we want to potentially incorporate into our story, you know, how does our local food council fit into the bigger picture of sustainable food systems, as an example. But also know that it is a clear understanding among the donor population that our efforts at a local level are where we need to start with to have big change and to make big progress. So what else do we know? We know the donor cycle, or if we don't know it, we're going to know it after today. So we've talked about a lot of these things, you know, independently, but this kind of just brings it all together when we think about our potential donors as individuals or as foundations. Our first step is we need to identify, know who your donors are, who they could be, focus on their linkage to the organization. What's their connection to the local food council, the work that you do? What are their interests that might start the conversation? And then what's their ability to give? You know, it's really important that we do our homework. If it's a foundation, you know, you don't just want to look at their guidelines, you want to look at their giving history. What have they given to councils or organizations of your size that are doing similar work? Same with individuals. We want to inform, and that's through this whole process of developing our mission, our vision, and our story. Share those things. You know, don't be shy. People want to hear about the good work that you're doing. Pique their interest by relating to the things that they care about. Most donors, and especially foundations, it's really easy to find, even if it's just through, with foundations, looking on foundationcenter.com, which is a resource that is usually available in most communities, either through your library or maybe community college, or just doing a Google search on a donor. You know, again, look to see what they're interested in, so that when you approach them, if it's through a call or through a letter, you know a little bit about them and how that you can take those interests and make them understand how they can be connected to your council. Involve them. You know, as a volunteer, volunteers really make the best donors, and volunteerism is a great way to get people engaged with your council at the ground level. Invest time. You know, if you look at any of those strategies I had listed earlier, really the biggest resource that it takes to successfully implement those strategies is your time. It takes time to put a list of 4 to 10 to 20 potential funders together and get to know each one of them, to document that information and then take the next step in building that relationship. So you need to be ready to invest time. And you need to integrate, make donors feel they are part of your work and show how their gift to you is going to make a difference. So we want to make sure we're not just asking for money, asking for support. It's even more important, in order to get that support at the level that you're hoping for, to first inform them, show them how their gift's going to have an impact, show them how their involvement is going to make a change at the local level, in turn affecting the bigger picture. Everybody likes to be involved. Everyone likes to be able to see how their involvement will result in change. So who's it going to be? And this is something similar to when I talked to you about the case statement. You know, I'm really tasking you guys, because I know it takes time that nobody has. You know, I'm one of you. I would say, that sounds great, but I don't have any time to do that. Well, guess what? Nobody else is going to do it for you. So much like the case statement, we need to sit down and think about, even just today, take a few minutes, think about 2 individuals potentially that either could be repeat renewal donors that you need to reach out to, or they could be new donors to your organization. So when we do that, and before we even think about really delving into fund development efforts, we need to make sure we have a method for tracking our donors and our funders. This can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet, just to make sure we're documenting who we're getting in touch with, who's giving, who's new, who's lapsed, and things of that nature. Or it could be more of a complex donor management software. I don't know if any of you currently have in place now a donor management software. Is there anybody on the line who could share the benefit of making sure that we track our relationships versus just having everybody on a bunch of sticky notes? Is anybody out there currently using a donor management software? Is anybody using Excel?
This is Winona. We do at Detroit Food Policy Council. We have a software.
And which one do you use?
We use Flipcall.
Okay. And how long have you had that in place?
About 1.5 years, 2 years.
Okay. And what would you say are some of the benefits that you've seen using that software versus being a little bit less structured with tracking donors?
So it's just as you said it. The benefit is that it's easy to pull from whatever campaign you have. I can go back and look at it and get reports. The reason I was quiet is because the hard part is to get the time to do all the things that the software allows you to do. But it's great to have it in place because it's in a wonderful, an easy to get to place, and it's easy to see which campaigns are successful. If you do something differently, like you said, you can really look back and see what kind of results you got. And also see, it's easy to pull up the people who are repeat givers, donators. And we've also had a campaign where we have Friends of the Detroit Food Policy Council. And so it even allows us to just do some automatic asking people to renew their friendship with us.
Okay, that's great. And again, you know, your council now may not be at a level of the Detroit Food Policy Council where you can invest in that donor software, because it is not just an investment of time, but a financial investment. But I ask that you please, regardless of where you are in your fund development efforts, say right now you have 0 donors, but you're here, so that means you're going to have donors in short order. We at least get that file, that Excel spreadsheet in place, that we have a tab that indicates any foundations, any individuals, any businesses or corporations, and we're tracking our progress with those. So information that you're going to want to include obviously is the name of the foundation and or individual, or the grant or the funder, the address, contact information, including address, phone numbers, and emails, and then an area where you can note progress. And not only does it does this tracking system, you know, Excel again is where we would start in our infancy. Not only does it allow us to run reports or to, you know, to get our information organized, it also allows us to build relationships more effectively, because you're tracking the progress you're making with foundations and individuals. So if you're in charge now, but potentially 3 years from now, you move on to not better, but maybe bigger things, the person that's going to be taking your place has somewhere to start, right? They have a history of your fund development efforts. So again, I challenge you today to at least get that tracking system started. There's so many small organizations that I've worked with, and I've asked them to hand over their fund development records. I shouldn't say a majority, but at least 5 that are top of mind right now. And I've gotten a box of papers. And that's a great place to start if that's where you are now. But start now tracking those in a more organized fashion, even if it's through Excel. Okay, I'm getting off my soapbox now, but I'm just telling you start on the right foot.
Jen, quick question. Do you know if there are any good templates out there that people, you know, that others have used that are just, you know, available online that people could grab and start using?
You mean like an Excel template?
Yeah, just kind of a, you know, to be able to start doing this right away, something that they can start with that doesn't require them to think it through and set something up.
It's something I could provide to them. I mean, I've developed templates for other organizations, so I can't think of an online resource off the top of my head unless it were tied to another software company, but I could certainly provide that to you to share if you want to make note of that.
That'd be great. Thanks.
You guys can just customize it to your councils, but at least it'll give you a place to start.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, this is Winona, and I'm breaking the rules because I'm not showing myself. But
that's okay. That's fine.
Do you have any favorite donor tools or management tools?
The 2 that I've worked with that are it seems to change every 3 years, but right now I prefer Donor Perfect for an organization that is more into the numbers and not the bells and whistles part of donor management software, meaning being able to send out, you know, nice graphic email blasts and things of that number. It's, to me, that's a really good nuts and bolts software. And then the newer to me that I've recently been exposed to is Boomerang. And they're a lot more cutting edge as far as really being able to turn communications around quickly. They have a lot of different, you know, elements that can really make your nonprofit or your council look a little bit more sophisticated in the area of donor communications than maybe you feel you are. So, and they have an excellent, excellent support system. So I guess I'd have to say, now that I've said it out loud, Boomerang would probably be my #1 choice. But if you're more of a cut and dry, accounting number-minded person, then Donor Perfect might be better suited for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you're interested too, let me know, because I could send at least some organizations that you could connect with that are working and pretty involved in both of those softwares. So you could ask some questions to people that are really in, you know, boots on the ground with the software itself.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yep. So Liz, if you can note that for me, that'd be great. So we're establishing a method for tracking our donors and funders. And then the next step with individuals, we want to build our donor pool. And this is something where, again, you have to prioritize. I know that when you have limited time and resources, you have to prioritize what you're going to do first. This is one example. If you have time to devote to the fund development process, building your donor pool with smaller donors. So for example, through an annual giving campaign, maybe a spring and a year-end annual appeal, this gives you an opportunity and a good place to start. So a lot of times people are like, where do we find our donors? You got to first think about who are your circle of friends, you know, who, meaning not your personal circle of friends necessarily, but your council's circle of friends. So who do you know that maybe is that you are connected through partnerships or attending programs or events that you're hosting and things of that nature. Another way to really identify individuals that are entry-level donors would be to host a house party. And I'm not talking about the house party that you remember attending in college, but more sophisticated, but really not a lot of work if you have a good lead representative or host or hostess. So essentially a house party, if you're not familiar with that concept, is just connecting with an individual who's influential in your community, not necessarily influential because of means, but maybe just in the food council system alone, just somebody who has good connections that's willing to invite individuals into their home so that you have an opportunity to really educate them and build relationships. And typically there is an ask associated with that event. And then of course there's larger scale fundraising events, including a fundraising dinner or other special events. But if you're a small shop, you just want to get started and you don't have a donor pool whatsoever to consider, the idea of a house party is a really great concept to consider to start building that donor base and start making some of those friends. Again, sorry, Liz, but if you can note, I can also provide kind of that one pager of what actions you need to take to host a successful house party. That's okay. So building your donor pool, you got to ask also who cares about your organization. So who should we be thinking about? Like I mentioned before, potentially event attendees and program participants, our volunteer base, our members. You know, if we're not asking for their support, we want to start developing strategies that allow us to successfully encourage them to support the organization financially. And then of course, determine how are we going to reach them? You know, are we going to do an online email campaign if we have emails captured for volunteers and program participants? Are we going to invest in direct mail? Is social media really our best bet right now because that's what we're most active on? What about crowdfunding? There's a whole nother baby, but certainly can be effective if you have the time and the resources to invest in that. So beyond building our donor pool of those entry-level donors, I also want you to think about major donors. With an organization or with a council that, again, is a small shop with limited resources, this is really the biggest bang for your buck. Foundations as well, but again, I'm in it to build relationships and long-term sustainability, and really where that's at is with major donors. So what's the first step with that? We first have to ask ourselves as a council, and we'll have this answer because we will have done all the planning leading up to this point. What do we consider a major gift? You know, we might consider $100 a major gift. We might consider $10,000 in a major gift. But we first need to identify that number so that we then can determine who are some major giving prospects that we want to start the conversation with or continue that conversation. If we're looking for new major gift prospects, we want to think about who currently supports food systems work in our area. You know, looking at partnerships, some of our partners, and who currently is supporting, you know, their work. Looking at organizations that are just, even strong nonprofits in the community and be reviewing their annual reports and recognizing names and pulling out those names to see if they'd be a good connection to our council. Then once you've established that list, and again, from today, it could just be a list of 2 to 4 people for this year, and that would be a great first step in the right direction. We really need to understand what are their specific giving interests and what is their capacity. And then ask yourselves, who are our connections to these individuals? Very rarely, if it's right and the perfect match or a good match, do you not have a single connection. Very rarely do you have to go into writing a letter or making a connection with a potential major donor blindly. So when I say who are your connections, you need to just really give some thought to, rather than just approaching this individual with a cold call, who might be connected to them in our community. Again, a great place to start with this conversation is your local community foundation. As long as you can go to them with more than just a list of names, you never want to go and say, hey, we just know this person's really great in our community and they have a lot of money. You want to be able to go to your community foundation's director and say, hey, we've done our homework, or at least show that. We have this list of 4 individuals that we know or we feel strongly would have a great interest in our work. Do you have advice for us as far as connecting with these individuals? Likely they will have relationships through donor advised funds, through board members of the community foundations and standing committees and things of that nature. It's a great place to start the conversation. You also want to think about your pool of volunteers and members. You know, those individuals that are close to the organization, that believe in what you do and are living it every day. If they have that connection, they can be the perfect individual to kind of build that bridge to that potential donor. And they're a really important part of the donor relations process. So once we've figured out who's connected, this individual or entity could also help you determine what's the best approach. You know, every donor is a unique individual and they all like to be communicated with in different ways. You know, if you think about maybe the more legacy donors, those donors who've been around for a while, they're more responsive to a letter in the mail, then followed up by a formal letter, then followed up by a phone call, then you'd schedule a meeting. Whereas some of those donors, the next generation, are really responsive to email. Again, it's just really understanding and knowing the best approach for your donor and taking that next step. Any questions about individuals before we move on? Any experiences that anybody wants to share?
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
So we were talking earlier about like this notion of competition. How do you navigate like pulling a donor off of someone's list and then not wanting to take them, wanting them to continue their support for that other organization because the work that they do is important, but trying to say the value that your council provides and encouraging to also to support. So I'm not clear on how that kind of conversation goes and acknowledging how you maybe found out about them.
Sure. As far, you mean if you were to get a donor name from a partner list or annual report? Well, keeping in mind, it isn't effective, nor is it the ethical thing to do to just grab all the $100,000 donors and up from your partners list, because 2 things. It doesn't feel good. It gets you in a position where you're asking yourself that question. But even more so, if you're doing that, it's like sending out a mailing just to a list of names of people in your community that you know have a lot of money. It's just not going to get you anywhere. So the way to not have that feeling is if it's in an annual report, if it's on a website, you know, the recognition wall or list or what have you, is public information for you to get names of individuals with higher giving capacities. And then the rationale or justification is you're only approaching these individuals if they would have an interest and a link to what you're doing. Okay, and at that point, you really need to understand that donors aren't going to make a decision, either them or you, especially when you're in conversation with them or in your letter, if you really showcase those partnerships. And I encourage all organizations to do that. So you're not hiding that you're partnered or your work aligns with another nonprofit organization or a nonprofit organization. Instead, you're sharing the importance of these collaborations and the fact that they do exist. So I really try to make sure people understand, and especially in smaller communities, it's not about competition. You know, if it's presented in the right way, if you're approaching donors for the right reason, there is enough to go around, especially at the major donor level.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Okay. Good. Oops, any other questions? And this is a great segue then into knowing your current and potential donors, making sure that we're not just asking them because we found them on a list or they're giving lots of money to, you know, local school efforts or, you know, the local environmental nonprofit, but we are connecting with them because we feel that they would have a genuine interest in our organization and they have a link to what we're trying to do. Keeping in mind too, as part of that process, you know, it never should feel as though you're hiding information or you're doing something that doesn't feel right. If you truly feel that you have a partner who has a donor that you are all now considering approaching, you can bring them into that conversation, and just like you would use a donor, use them as a resource. Help them understand how you see that it fits with your council as well as the work of their organization. And in some cases, like you would do with a foundation, you can approach a donor with a joint request. And like I said, with foundations, that too is looked upon favorably with donors. So it shows that we've given thought to, you know, making sure we're not duplicating efforts. And it's also showcasing how we're working in partnership with other organizations in our community to have a greater impact. So that's something too you want to keep in the back of your mind. So knowing our potential donors means knowing their giving history, who they've given to in the past and why, and the amounts, their linkage to our organization, their ability to give and their interest in what we do. And again, the linkage might be just that connection they have through another individual. If they've given in the past to our organization or our council. And that sounds like it's silly, but sometimes if people don't do their research, you know, I've seen nonprofit organizations put themselves in a bad position where they ask for a gift as if it's a new gift and they've actually given 5 years ago. So we want to make sure we know that history about the donor. What time of year do they typically give? You know, in our minds, a lot of times we have in the spring, at year end. Well, that's not the case all the time. Of course, that when you think of the majority of donors, that is when a lot of that does happen. But when we got to think of our individual major donors, you know, again, as individuals and really understanding the timing of their gift. So then determining the who, what, when, where, and why is very critical in going into your prospect research. And also preparing for that first donor meeting. So once you've determined what that approach will be and how you're going to make that initial contact, and you've gotten now that go ahead for that first meeting, you want to determine who will attend the donor meeting and who will make the ask. And it's really important that you go into these discussions. I don't like the word scripted because we don't want you glued to a script and not looking up and talking to the donor. But if you have another individual that's going with you, potentially that person is the one with the connection and the one making the ask, you certainly are going to want to have a conversation with them and make sure that you play out between the two of you how that conversation will go so that you're not stepping over each other. And so there's not that moment of silence when you're both looking at each other of who's going to talk next. So just be thoughtful about that before the meeting. Set your goals for the meeting or conversation. You know, what do we want to get out of this today? Not every meeting, especially with a new relationship, is going to be an ask for money, an ask for financial support. It might be an ask for advice. It might be an ask for them to attend your next event. So you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as what you want what goal you want to accomplish during that specific meeting. Create talking points, and these talking points should include your impact. Meaning, when I say not your council's impact, but the donor's impact, the gift the impact their gift will have on the work of the council in their community. So that's really what you want to focus the conversation on. Then you're going to schedule the meeting. And during that meeting, you're going to let the donor, I use the word lead loosely, but let them lead the conversation, meaning don't get into a pattern where you feel like, much like a webinar, but hopefully not this one, that you're just talking at the donor the whole time and they're nodding and you're really just getting a lot of this or that, or hopefully not nodding off. That's even worse. You want to involve them in the conversation. And boy, if they take off on a point that relates to your work, sometimes it doesn't, you can always rein them back in, but let them feel a part of it, not necessarily in control of the conversation, but that it is a true conversation with back and forth dialogue. And be flexible in your approach. You know, I talked about creating talking points. I talked about being prepared for your meeting. You know, you could walk into a donor meeting feeling you've done all of your homework, and then you find out that, you know, the donor just made a $2 million gift to a charity they support in Boston, so they're tapped out for the year. And here you thought this was going to be your major ask. Well, you need to be flexible in your approach and kind of position yourself to be adaptable to potential changes in the conversation. Oops. Any questions about the who, what, when, where, and why? The emphasis I want to make on this slide really is the why, you know, making sure that you're communicating in your talking points why this donor, you know, why me, why now? Those are very important questions for you to answer and be able to answer through your conversation. Two important key things you want to talk about during that discussion is the future of the organization. Again, if we've done all the planning up front, we can easily share that with the donor. And then, okay, that's great, but how do the donors' interests, concerns, and goals align with that vision? So again, we're making sure that they understand we've made a connection before we even sat down at the table. And this is where you see the donor's involvement having the greatest impact. Make it personal. And yes, those of you who attended last week have seen this slide before, but that's how important it is. So I'm bringing it back. You want to know your donor, as we talked about, their history. You want to know their giving, their link, their ability. You want to know your counsel. You have that strong story together to share so that you can show the donor how that their interests align with your mission, vision, and story. You want to know yourself. I talked about this last week, but some of us, like me, are big talkers. Not that we like to hear ourselves talk, but when we get passionate about an organization that we really wear close to our heart, it's easy to go off on tangents. And if that's how you are, you want to make sure that you know that about yourself. So when you're in a donor meeting, you know when to pull yourself back, let the donor talk. If you're more of an introvert and these kinds of conversations are difficult for you, then you need to practice more before you go into these meetings with major donors so that you make sure that the conversation flows nicely at a level that you're comfortable with and that is successful for you. Again, you want to adapt to changing conversation and directions. And then lastly, you want to make the ask. And you want to keep in mind, as I mentioned before, this could be an ask for funding, but it could just be an ask for involvement, or it could be an ask simply for advice. And again, I'm going to use my favorite statement, one of my favorites. You know, you ask for advice is when you get funding. You ask for funding is typically when you get advice. So I should share a quick example with you. When I was a director for a summer camp, I put this awesome, in my mind, slideshow together for one of our major donors who'd been giving consistently for like 5 years. And I had never met the person before, but they were connected to the organization. And I got to the end of the slideshow, I made my ask, and he looked me square in the face and said, yeah, that was a nice slideshow, but you know, you're on one of the most beautiful lakes in Michigan, and there's not one picture of the kids enjoying the lake. And I was like, oh, so needless to say, I didn't get any funding that day, not an increase in funding, but I made that change. And when I went back to the donor that following year, he doubled his gift because I listened. I just listened. I put a picture of the lake in the slideshow, and that made all the difference in the world. But the point is, if they're not ready to be, they're not to the point from the cultivation process for you to ask for funds. If it's an uncomfortable, weird feeling, then you know the time's not right. But they're always ready and prepared to be seen as a resource for your nonprofit. And if we ask for their advice, we need to listen and great things will happen. So that was my alarm that just went off, meaning, wow, we're 20 minutes to 2 already. So if I go through these next slides fairly quickly, it's because I want you to have a chance to ask questions. But time flies when you're having fun in fun development. So who's it going to be when we think of foundations? Again, I challenge you. When I say who's it going to be, I'd love for you guys to walk away today with the thought of putting, maybe if you're an established council and you have that list of foundations, maybe adding 2 new ones for the remainder of this year that you'll consider approaching. If you're a new council, then it's maybe just putting a list of 1, 2, or 4 foundations together that you'll consider approaching this year. And then research. Ask yourself, what are your opportunities with previous or current foundations? What foundations have areas of focus that align with your work that maybe you haven't considered? What are your resources? Again, I referenced the Foundation Center. Usually the Foundation Center in most communities has a co-op center either within the library or local community college or college. And it is a tremendous resource. A lot of times, especially with smaller organizations, they'll ask me, hey, should I look at this grant? Find a grant software or connector that can get me connected with foundations. And I have not found one that I am impressed with aside from Foundation Center. And what it does for you, it allows you to type in, your specific area of focus that relates to your cause. It will bring up foundations that are local to your area or give in your area. And it really is a helpful tool in starting that list. Has anybody used Foundation Center before? Anybody on the line? Oh, I definitely recommend that you check it out. In addition, as far as resources, again, it's in who you know. Ask around. There are individuals who are connected to foundations or people that may have experience in approaching foundations that unless you ask, you're not going to know. We talked about this a little bit already, but think about what partners make sense for collaborating on grant requests and have conversations with those partners. If you're a new council and they're seasoned in grant writing, they can also serve as a tremendous resource for you, and it can give you a leg up when applying for funds when you're showing those collaborative efforts. You do have to think about what angle you want to take with each funder, and I'm not saying angle like in a CD kind of way. And what I'm saying is, even though we have our case statement in place that tells all about who we are, what we do, and why you should care, we have to remember that each funder, each foundation has their specific area of focus. So for example, if we're talking about, if they support capacity building, but their areas of interest really align with our programming, we're going to state in our need statement that we need to fund the people that make our work possible. But we're also going to showcase that program or that service or that partnership that aligns with their area of focus. So another way to go about this, if they don't support capacity building directly, a lot of times they will support it through another program or a partner relationship. So for example, if you had a program where just through that program you could get X percentage of staffing time funded, you can break it out that way as well. And we need to make sure we're aware of the timing for requests. I don't want to say the majority, but a lot of funders certainly have timing in the spring and then the fall. But when we put that action plan together, again, we're going to want to make sure that we have a calendar for foundations to make sure that we don't miss those grant opportunities. And lastly, as I mentioned, I do challenge you to put together a list of who you're going to approach this year. And maybe it's not approaching them, maybe it's just who you're going to research this year. It just depends on where your council is from the standpoint of having the resources to start off your grant program. Oops. It's my alarm again telling us we're getting closer. After we've done our research, we want to pursue those grants. So once we have that list, again, it could be a list of 2, it could be a list of 4 to 10, whatever your resources allow, whatever your capacity allows, and you're going to want to make contact. Even if it says on their website, please submit electronic letter of intent. We'll let you know, and then we'll let you into the grant portal and you can do the whole request. Even if it says that, still make personal contact with that program officer and start to develop that relationship. You're going to submit your letter of intent. Once they give you the go-ahead, you're going to write the grant. You're going to follow up, meaning about 2 weeks after you submit that grant, just follow up with a friendly call and ask if there's any questions at all. Typically, they'll say no, but sometimes they do have questions. But again, it gives you that opportunity to have a touchback to help build that relationship. And then lastly, you want to thank them, again, whether or not you receive the funding, you want to thank them for consideration. If you do receive the funding, you want to report as required by most foundations on the progress of the grant, and you want to keep them engaged. And to Lori's point, even if you don't get the funding, it's important to continue that relationship, because you never know when down the road, it might not have been right now, but it may be later. And if you have that relationship in place, it just helps your chances. Now looking at who's it going to be for corporations and businesses, which again, when you think of diversifying your funding mix, which I recommended during the first webinar, focusing primarily on individuals, foundations, and corporations and businesses. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because it's very similar to, to how you would approach a potential foundation. So what are the opportunities with current businesses and funders? What businesses have areas that align with your work? What are your resources? Specifically with corporations and businesses, it's very likely that you have a volunteer or a member who's connected to that local business. One difference between working with foundations, and this is in line primarily with like corporate and business sponsorships, but can also be relevant to a corporate or business gift. In your conversation with them, you want to ask, what are your business goals and how can we help you meet those? Now, it's not like there's certain things you can do. You certainly can't help them meet all of their business goals, but if they're looking for outreach opportunities or to help strengthen their reputation in the community, things that you could do as a council potentially, if you have a website or if you're doing an article for an event that you're hosting, or if you have communications at your various programs, you can list them as a corporate or a business sponsor, so they're gaining that recognition and that positive recognition for their affiliation with your organization. So that's one question different from a foundation that you'd want to incorporate into your ask when talking with corporations and businesses. And then again, what angle do you want to take with the funder? What's the timing of request? Usually with businesses and corporations, they're on their fiscal years on the calendar year. So most budget planning happens like September and October for that following for that following calendar year. So as far as when you want to make your ask or when you want to start building these relationships, it's going to be like August and September timeframe, so that before all of their funds have been allocated. I'm going through this quickly too. So who, what, when, where, and why with businesses, similar to your meetings that you would have with an individual donor, because you're meeting with people, right? So you want to follow those same guidelines as far as determining who will attend and who will make the ask. And the person who has the connection should certainly be involved in that process. You want to set your goals, create your talking points, get the meeting on the calendar. Again, let the individual lead the conversation and be flexible with your approach. What to talk about, again, similar as it is with individual donors. You want to talk about the future of your organization and how the business or corporation's interests and concerns and goals relate to that. Make it personal. I'm going to keep bringing this up because it's really important. So you have them hooked, right? You have individuals hooked, you've got foundations hooked, and you've got corporations and businesses hooked. So you're in the ideal situation, everybody's involved, everybody loves you, knows about you, and is supporting your mission. So how do you keep them? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Don't forget. It's really important to make sure that when we receive, not even when we receive a gift, when someone says yes to a meeting or a phone conversation. And even if the outcome isn't financial benefit for the council, you want to thank them for that. Certainly when they give a gift, we want to thank them, and you can never thank them enough. Through a formal acknowledgement, through handwritten acknowledgement, from partners or volunteers, it goes a long way. You want to cultivate that relationship. And I always say, with individuals, foundations, and businesses, no does not mean never, right? So if your first meeting with an individual or your first grant request, you get a no, it doesn't mean they're never going to support you. It means that they now know about you, you're on the radar, and there's a potential there. So you want to continue to cultivate that relationship with donors who do take action and give to the organization, as well as those that may have declined support at this time but are potential for future, and you want to keep them engaged. Now, that being said, there is a little note that I want to make. There are some individuals and foundations that no does mean no, and we just have to use our best judgment in those cases and have to know when to bless and release individuals, which usually it's pretty obvious. But, if you're approaching somebody, an individual, you feel that they're connected, but the timing's not right, you've asked, and it's been year 3 or month 8, and they haven't shown any response, we have to know when to let go of that relationship. And lastly, once we've been successful in that cultivation, that is an ongoing process, we want to make sure we steward those relationships and that we help those donors stay connected. And we can do that in ways such as, email, if we have a newsletter, an annual report, making sure that certainly our current donors, but also our potential donors receive those communications. They're made aware of our accomplishments and the good work that the council is doing in the community.
What about inviting them to things like events or local food summits or dinners or the farmers market open for the season?
Yes, 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 and yes. Or cultivate and engage. Some donors love, you might think, this isn't really for them. They just gave us a $5,000 gift. You'd be surprised. Always extend the invitation because they love to be involved, and they can always say no. But that's a great point. Any event, any opening, any ribbon cutting, certainly consider involving those donors. Thank you for that. Where are we with time? Okay, just some quick tips. So if you're like, that's great, Jen, loved the webinar, you were kind of funny and I was able to stay engaged the whole time, great, but I'm still overwhelmed. What can I do right now, today? These are just some tips. Like I said, I know we have limited resources. If you had to focus on anything in particular, here are a few things I would focus on. Focus on fund development activities that have the biggest bang for your buck. So again, I'm not downplaying events by any means. They're very time consuming and usually don't turn around a lot of dollars, at least not as much as we hope. So events might not be the #1 recommendation. You want to make sure you're focusing on what is the best use of your time right now. That being said, individual donors are the largest source of untapped potential, and building these valuable relationships is key to long-term sustainability. So if you had to focus on anything, it would be the idea of including individual donors in your funding mix. And it might be this year simply having that conversation, because I understand and realize that a lot of the local food councils are not tapping that potential right now. So maybe this year it's just having the conversation and asking yourselves, what does that look like? I know a lot of councils are not nonprofit organizations, so maybe that conversation leads to, what does it look like for us then? Do we need a fiduciary sponsor? Who might that be? So on and so forth. So just starting that conversation. And lastly, focus on what your donors and supporters are interested in, not what your council needs, but instead how interests align with helping you meet that need. So that's all about building your case. It's not all about us. It's all about impact. And when you're building that case, which is one of the things I would focus on, you want to make sure that you're keeping it in mind. Wow, and we're done. So we have a few minutes left here for questions. Sorry that I took up most of the time, but do we have any questions that we'd like to get answered here before we sign off? I'm looking over some of the questions we had here initially. One thing I would like to point out, we've gone over a lot, you're going to have access to this webinar. If you think of, there's some tools that would be helpful. For example, I know Liz mentioned what might a donor tracking spreadsheet look like. Please be sure to forward those to either Liz or Megan, and we can make sure that we get those resources to you. Another point that I know was brought up at the beginning, but I just want to echo, Lori had mentioned, or maybe it was Liz, the fact that letters of support can be used when working to acquire state funds. Again, letters of support are great even when working with individuals and foundations. So put yourself in a position where, if you meet somebody who's really jazzed about the work you're doing in the community, start banking those letters of support. Certainly some might have to be customized to grant timing, but if you get testimonials and letters of support that you can build into your request to foundations and individuals, again, that is certainly another asset that will get you ahead in the fundraising process.
Jen, to close, maybe what we could do is if we could go to everybody being up on the screen, you stop sharing your screen and just do a 3-word check-in from folks, either to either write in the chat or to share out loud about where they're feeling now after hearing all this stuff for fund development. Like, for me personally, it's I'm enthused, thoughtful, and waiting. Good. So anybody else? Markel, I see you flash. Everybody, oh, like lots of faces. So great.
I can go first. I think this, for me, everything makes a lot of sense, and I love all of the specifics. I feel stuck at the start line for us because we don't have an operating budget, and I think every year we're always kind of like, well, how much money do we need to do stuff? And then it's like, well, what should we be doing? And it's like, well, that depends on how much money we have. And so, I don't know how to necessarily chew through that because we're this advisory council to the county. And I always feel at this impasse of well, do we do anything? And if so, what are we doing? How much money does that cost? And then all of these things make sense in terms of how to get money. But always kind of feel stuck at that starting line, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And Winona put in the chat, lots to do.
Yeah, this is Larry. I'll say I'm feeling reflective, I guess, because I think where we really need to focus our energy right now is right at the starting point of figuring out what service we really offer. What Local Food Alliance has been, since it started, as a convening place. It's brought individuals and organizations, different entities together, and it's less clear just how we go about doing that, or if that's what we want to be doing, if there's something else we need to be doing. So I think we're at a point where we really need to just go back to figuring out what we're in what role we're playing in this community.
Yeah, and Janelle put in the chat, still learning and asking what success would look like for us. I think, what everybody, and Rachel, after this webinar, I'm much more hopeful, inspired, and now I know what to do next for the council. The next steps slide, very helpful. And if this has really made you thoughtful and say, okay, these are the next steps, please, listen, I would encourage you to take that into thoughts about the capacity building grants, because that's really what they're there for, is to help your organizations move forward based on what you need and where you are. So anybody else on check-ins?
Can I make one statement?
Yeah.
So again, I'm going to go back to how every fund development plan fits into a strategic plan. So all the things, especially Markel and Larry, that you're talking about are defined through that visioning process. And again, it doesn't be long and drawn out 100-page document no one's going to implement. It can be very action oriented to get you to the next step where you can even think about funding. So back to Megan's point, certainly consider the capacity building grants, and if not through this resource, also your local community foundations. I also work with community foundations throughout the state of Michigan, and capacity building is a focus for them. And your selling point can be you understand and realize that any vision without a plan is a hallucination, and we need help to bring that vision to reality.
All right, well, that brings us to 2 o'clock. Anybody, any final words or thoughts?
I guess I'll just throw in, this is Liz, that to sort of what both Markel and Larry are saying, and people who seem to really have some thoughts percolating. I'm thinking about what we can offer as a network, and if the learning cohort idea is one where people would be able to kind of work through some of those specifics of their council's nuances in putting together a fund development plan. Like Markel is saying, having to work within a county structure and trying to figure out that chicken and egg problem. Or if there are more opportunities like this that we can help provide to everyone at once, and so I would love to hear feedback as you guys kind of go back to your councils and digest this information on what needs to come next for you, because we don't want this to be 4 hours that you sat and got a bunch of good information and then you just feel stuck at the point of taking the next step with it. So if there are things that we can support as you go forward and try to dig deeper into this with your council, please do let us know.
And finally, we have our regular phone call on Thursday at 10. It's going to be shortened. So just legislative updates, connections, requests, and offers. And that might be an opportunity to continue this conversation after everybody's had a chance to mull it over or process it. But I want to thank Jen so much. Again, it's a short notice and you did a fantastic job, and we really appreciate it. And we really appreciate everybody from the Food Council is taking the time today. Thanks.
Thank you for all your work. I really appreciate it. Just as a resident of Northern Michigan even. So thank you. Keep it up.
All right. Well, we'll see you Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.